If you're as big a fan of the original PlayStation as I am, I'm coming for you, and I'm coming hard. The original PlayStation was Sony's first foray into home video game hardware, and after they were betrayed by Nintendo when they pulled out of their SNES CD agreement, like I pulled out of your dad, took revenge upon Nintendo by dominating the 5th generation of video game consoles. Sony opened up their urethra and sucked up all those hardware and software sales like a vacuum. Releasing in 1994 in Japan, 95 in North America and Europe, the PlayStation would sell 102 million units worldwide by the time it was discontinued. With such a large install base, a large library was developed. With such a huge selection of titles, it's impossible for all of them to be high-selling mega hits, which unfortunately left a lot of excellent games with much less exposure than they deserve. So in this video, I'm going to go over some of the most underrated PlayStation hidden gems that are sure to tickle your pickle.
Peppermint schnapps makes me sloppy.
Ghost in the Shell is a third-person action shooter developed by Exact, the Jumping Flash guys, releasing in 1997 and is based on the Chinese cartoon for children of the same name. You take control of a faceless ghost simply named Rookie and live inside of a giant turtle shell on wheels known as Fukikoma, hence the name Ghost in the Shell. After the Human Liberation Front blows up a corporate building, Public Security Section 9 is sent to sniff all the bike seats in the area. The game opens with a great-looking animated cutscene that gets me busting a shameful nut all over my own face every time I see it. Most of the story is told through animated cutscenes similar to the opening that play between missions, and feature the entire English cast from the Chinese cartoon, including Scarlett Johansson. Gameplay has the player take direct control of Fukikoma that is capable of directional movement, strafing, as well as scaling walls and hanging upside down from ceilings. The verticality and methods of movement are really impressive considering the game's age. Fukikoma is equipped with twin machine guns, as well as a guided missile launcher that can be charged up to shoot up to 6 missiles at once. Getting within a certain range of enemies activates the game's generous auto lock-on, which, when mixed with the crazy movement, makes this game feel way ahead of its time. The general gameplay is not overly complex, and maybe gets a little repetitive as the game goes on, but there's no denying that it's incredibly satisfying. The gameplay loop is further complemented by the game's visuals. Ghost in the Shell manages to keep a pretty steady frame rate despite the action on screen, and although it's not one of the best looking games of all time, it does a good job of recreating the Chinese cartoon's look and feel through its muted color palette and excellent soundtrack. Ghost in the Shell is often overlooked when discussing the PS1 library, and definitely deserves much more recognition as an excellent PS1 action game.
I am Untitled, the magician!
Harmful Park is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that released exclusively in Japan in 1997, though thankfully there's an English patch available nowadays, and that's how I first played this batshit crazy game, and I'm glad I did. A scientist named Ronald Rimjob makes all the rides and attractions at a theme park come to life, and it's now up to another scientist's daughters to fly around the place and kill everything. The visuals in this game are amazing. This is what clowns see when they close their eyes at night. It's like a scary ketamine trip, but the trip never goes away and lasts the rest of your entire life. If this is what the Heaven's Gate people saw when they landed on that comet, I wish I could have gone with them. The player has access to a few different weapons, such as your standard machine gun thing that shoots straight ahead. You can throw blumpkin pies that travel in an arc, and there's jelly beans that kind of fly all over. The game is full of these funny and charming level elements and bosses, such as a blow-up dragon covered in patches, and this romance play that has you shooting out the little love hearts that pop up when Juliet is finger blasting Romeo's butthole. The sprites for the enemies are incredibly varied and well animated. Each of the 6 levels in the game are based on their own visual theme that you would expect to find in a theme park, and the bosses and enemies fit creatively within it. My personal favorite is this whale that shoots out little Colonel Sanders at you, and you guys know how much I love sucking dick behind the KFC. Harmful Park, like most shmups, is super short. All 6 levels with minimal deaths will take you less than an hour to clear, and it's not overly difficult either. Shooter fans probably won't get much of a challenge from it, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. The gameplay overall is solid and fun, and just the graphical ride this game takes you on alone is well worth giving Harmful Park a playthrough. Silent Bomber is a third-person action game developed by CyberConnect, later renamed to CyberConnect 2, released in 1999 in Japan, 2000 in North America. Player takes control of the main character, Peter Pussyfart, a war criminal conscripted into the military service. 7 years prior to the event of the game, Peter walks in on his parents making love while slathered head to toe in mayo.
A jizz of mayonnaise is required, which is squirted onto the bread via an automated dispenser.
After witnessing a legendary enchanted backshot, Peter is left traumatized, leaving him mostly devoid of emotion as an adult. Back in the present, Peter is tasked with destroying a space cruiser known as Dante, where most of the action takes place. Gameplay is kind of a fast faster-paced Bomberman. Instead of launching projectiles at enemies directly, Peter instead plants explosives either at his feet or can stick them to enemies by throwing them from a distance. The bombs will stay planted until a player decides to manually detonate them. You can stack multiple bombs on top of each other to produce a more potent explosion. There are also a number of different bomb types, such as a napalm bomb that leaves a pool of fire that damages enemies within over time, paralysis bomb that disables electronic devices and deals extra damage to mechanical enemies, and a love bomb that when detonated makes my wife come back with the kids. The game's opening cinematic and voice acting are super PlayStation 1.
I'm the mere shell of a man now. Nothing more than a killing machine.
The visuals leave a little bit to be desired as you progress through the game. Most of the indoor environments are very similar in design and color palette, but there are some highlights during the game's boss fights. The camera swoops down to a more over-the-shoulder angle during these fights and makes the game feel more cinematic. The final boss in particular has some really cool abstract visuals going on throughout the fight. Silent Bomber is a fun, fast-paced action game with a lot to offer. Gameplay stands up really well despite the controls feeling a little dated, and it deserves a spot on the list of best action games on the PlayStation 1. Untitled Concerto is a third-person action game developed by the same people that made Silent Bomber, releasing in 1998. It's fairly similar to Ape Escape, except instead of catching little apes, you run around capturing juicy pussy. The game is set on a floating island called Kingdom of Prairie, and I can only hope that one day the entire thing falls from the sky and lands directly in a volcano. Prairie is populated entirely by anthropomorphic cats and dogs, and it makes me want to set fire to the entire kingdom. There's animosity between the two species, because of course there is. The player takes control of Blue Waffle Rye Bread, a teenage police dog that runs around on a giant mech called the Police Robo, stomping on the weak. A bad guy named Fool entices the African-American cat gang with the promise of revenge in exchange for gathering up 4 power crystals he needs to revive a giant robot called Iron Giant. It's up to Blue Waffle to stop him. Gameplay takes place from a third-person perspective, and the player is able to run, jump, climb ledges, and hover in the air for a few seconds in their dumb police robo. The general goal of most of the levels is to capture all of the hairy pussy, though there is a decent amount of traditional platforming throughout the game as well, and a couple of boss fights. There are also a couple of sections with unique mechanics, such as a minecart you can ride between areas to capture filthy little cats, and a more vertical level that you can traverse with a jetpack. The player is able to fly between floating land masses with their airship, and each one contains its own area with NPCs you can speak to who will tell you all about their piddly-ass problems. Untitled Concerto still plays very well despite its age. It still feels like a solid platformer. There are some nice presentation qualities as well, such as animated cutscenes and a fair amount of English voice acting, though it is 90s-ass anime voice acting, so your tolerance may vary. Visuals are bright and cartoony with a steampunk art style, and the game never takes itself too seriously. The game failed to deeply and forcefully penetrate the wider gaming zeitgeist, resulting in the game not having a very big following. Untitled Concerto is a solid action game, and it's an easy recommendation for fans of platformers. Jade Cocoon, Story of the Tamamayu, is a JRPG with some virtual pet stuff developed by Genki, releasing in 1999. It had the unfortunate task of releasing on a console that already had a metric cum dumpster of amazing JRPGs. The story follows a young man named Arthur Assrammer who dreams to follow in his father's footsteps by going out one day for milk and cigarettes and never coming back. Arthur is forced into an arranged marriage to an ugly thing named Mabu, which is apparently necessary for him to become a cocoon master, this world's equivalent of a Pokemon trainer. Their little town of Cyrus is attacked by sexy demons called Onibubu, and after receiving copious amounts of demon seed in their bellies, the townsfolk fall into a deep slumber. This spurs Arthur to go on a quest to find a cure for demon cum-induced comas. The world is predominantly covered in dense woodland and inhabited by creatures known as minions, and not the ones that I want to fuck. The player is able to capture these creatures to use in battle, sold into slavery for cash, or combined with other minions to create more powerful combinations of creatures. Battles occur when you run into enemies that roam around the world. You can attack minions yourself if you're a little bitch, or you can summon one of your own to fight for you. Minions follow a rock, paper, scissors element system, with certain elements being weak against some and strong against others. Most minions only have one element, but fused ones can have multiple. The visuals are similar to Square Enix's output at the time. The game features pre-rendered backgrounds with 3D character models on top. There are several dozen minions to collect throughout the game, some only available after you beat the main story, after which you unlock the Eternal Corridor. The Eternal Corridor is a presumably infinite set of randomly generated rooms, with a boss minion occasionally making an appearance. The enemies that you encounter in this mode become increasingly more difficult the deeper into the corridors you progress, making the challenge greater the farther in you go. Jade Cocoon is kind of a scrappy underdog JRPG for the PlayStation. It's definitely not as big in scope as any of the Final Fantasy games, but it has an undeniable charm and character. If you've already played through Final Fantasy 1 through 9 and many other JRPGs on the console a dozen times by now, give Jade Cocoon a try for something unique and often overlooked. Sexy Parodius is a 1999 shoot-'em-up developed by Konami and is the 5th installment in the Parodius series. A little octopus and penguin guy recruit numerous characters, some appearing in other video games, to work for their agency that helps people. Instead of simply surviving a stage with enough lives, Sexy Parodius also tasks the player with little submissions during stages, such as collecting a certain amount of coins or destroying a certain enemy. Succeeding or failing in these submissions determines whether or not you can progress or what the next stage will be. Completing every submission in every level will unlock a super special, super secret level. Parodius is intended to be a satirical take on shmups of the era, hence its name being a portmanteau of the word parody and Gradius, another side-scrolling shooter series also made by Konami. As such, the game's stages are full of stupid and crazy enemies. Most importantly, the game features waifus in various forms, including a Medusa boss and a BBL lady. There are multiple endings depending on the path you take through the game. One seeing the octopus guy stealing all the money from the agency and living happily on a beach surrounded by beautiful women, pissing the other characters off. Best ending, however, is when the octopus guy fails to get away and ends up getting crushed by an Amazonian woman's giant ass. I can only hope to go out that way. As you'd expect from a shoot-'em-up, visuals are crazy. Every stage features dozens of different enemy types and sprites. There's flying cats and chickens shooting stuff at you, as well as fairies with bows and flying cups and faces and shit. The bosses are a real visual highlight here. The first boss being a giant corn that I want to caress with butter, and another being a heavy woman that you can look at the ass. There's also a 2-player co-op mode here, and when 2-player characters are firing while in close proximity, you get extra projectiles to shoot at the corns. Full playthrough of Sexy Parodius will only take about half an hour, so it's a perfect shooter to play on a retro handheld while waiting for your prostate tickle appointment or enjoying some fresh Blumpkin pie. There's my list of underrated PlayStation gems. So go ahead and open up your urethra and vacuum suck up that like and subscribe button. I hope to see you guys in the next video.